it is good to talk with you. I'm sharing my slide deck with you. You know, you can call this program resilient through insurance, but also other risk management techniques. We're going to be talking about a variety of things here today. Let me tell you about a little bit more about myself and the organization that I am with. So Farm Commons, we're a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to empower agricultural communities to address their own legal vulnerabilities within an ecosystem of support. So we do educational things just like this, webinars. We also do workshops, we produce guides, we have a podcast, we run a Q&A platform. And we also deeply believe that farmers are the solutions to their own problems. And we invest in leadership development that helps farmers understand where solutions are and how to create them for themselves. We are a membership-driven organization as well. But what about me? So my name is Rachel Armstrong. I'm joining you from Duluth, Minnesota, a far cry from where you might be. Yes, we have like 2.5, 3 feet of snow on the ground. It's pretty miserable, I gotta say. The high is 1 degree this weekend. So wish I was where you were. But hey, this is where I grew up, and this is where my family is now. Actual picture of the ancestors there growing cabbage and potatoes not far from where I live now. I founded Farm Commons because I believe you deserve this information so you can develop resilience that is consistent with your values. I am an attorney. I never thought I would be an attorney when I grew up. I thought I would be a farmer, but that didn't happen for a wide variety of reasons. So the next best thing, I work with farmers and spend all my days crafting and delivering educational material. Okay, so why talk about insurance? Why talk about risk management? Because bad things happen. Scary things can happen. And what I want you to do is reflect on in your mind, because we're not in a room, so you can't really tell me, reflect on the things that worry you about your operation. Maybe the prices will drop, that demand won't be there, that there'll be a storm, a volcano, that there will be theft, vandalism, just disagreements, people backing out of deals. All kinds of bad things can happen. And for when those bad things do happen, we have a wide variety of insurance policies to help cover for many of these bad things. So insurance is a very American traditional business risk management tool that we use. And it can be hard as a small business owner to figure out which insurance tools are really right for you. So we're going to talk in my 30 minutes here, we're going to cover a wide variety of bad things that can happen and the ways that insurance policies and other extra things that you can do are going to help cover for that. We're going to cover production risks. So you don't yield as much product as you thought. And so now you don't have as much to sell. Marketing risks, the price goes down. Injury risks, people come to your property or they go to your farmer's market stand and they get hurt. They eat your food, they get hurt. Facility and property risks. Your facilities are damaged, your tractors are stolen. And then we're going to touch on non-compliance and financial risks and how we can manage those. So we got a big agenda, but don't worry, we are going to use great use of your time and don't hesitate to use that chat to get me your questions. Okay, so we're going to start with production and marketing risks. So we're going to lump those together because many of the USDA insurance policies handle these together. So when people thinking about the horrible things that could happen when it comes to production and marketing, we start with those things like acts of God, weather events, insects, and then even decline in prices. Well, the federal government is here to help. They have subsidized the purchase price of crop insurance. Now, it's federally subsidized, but you purchase these policies from private insurance agents. Crop insurance comes in a wide, crop and livestock insurance comes in a variety of different options. Multi-peril is a classic, been around for a long time. We have NAP coverage, some livestock options, and whole farm revenue protection. I'm going to leave whole farm revenue protection for Lane to cover and the new microfarm option. It's a great one. We might go through multi-peril, NAP, and livestock, and you're gonna be like, no, That's fine. Don't wait, or don't worry. Lane will get to WFRP, which is a really powerful opportunity. So multi-peril. This is a classic policy available nationwide. And in Hawaii, it's only available for coffee, papaya, banana, and macadamia nuts. And both the tree and the fruit are covered. So both the tree, if it gets knocked down and you can't, produce anymore, or if you have a temporary or a one season crop failure. It protects against your classic acts of God, weather, wildfire, fire, eruption, but it does not cover vandalism, which I know is often a concern with our higher value crops or anything that's near tourists, I guess. Indemnity, or the price that you're going to receive if this bad thing happens, is based on the commodity price and the coverage level that you select. The commodity price might be great for you, but it might not be great for you. If you sell into a high value market, farm identified, direct to consumer, this might not be good enough. So as you can see here, a farmer who chooses a 50% coverage level, let's say they lose 5,000 pounds of papaya, they're only going to get, 47 cents a pound. So that's 1,175 bucks. Is it worth it? It might be for a producer that really depends on that in order to, help cover the tax bill or something like that. So only the individual can decide. Take a look. Now we're going to talk NAP. This is called the Non-Insured Crop Disaster Assistance Program. If you can't buy other insurance, like multi-peril, that's, you don't grow bananas or papayas or macadamia nuts. Maybe there is not a good insurance product for you. You can consider this. It is similar bare bones coverage. You get the market, you get the amount that you receive is based off the market price, not your price. And your losses have to exceed 50%. So you don't get a lot of money out of the NAP program, but it can be free. And for free, why not? If you are beginning, limited resource, socially disadvantaged, veteran, etc., you may have access to this policy for free. Don't go to an insurance agent though. It's only available through FSA, Farm Service Agency. So keep this one in mind, especially if you meet these disadvantaged classes and you don't have to pay for it. Then why not? Livestock insurance. If you are a livestock producer, keep your eye on LRP, or livestock risk protection products. These compensate for price declines on feeder cattle. So this is not an acts of God coverage, it's acts of the market. And it can be, it can be a great opportunity if you're really dependent on getting a certain price for your animal. So again, I'm leaving WFRP for Lane to cover. It's a really good one. So if those didn't quite meet your needs, don't worry, there's more. I'm going to talk to you also about injury risks. This is something that farmers worry about a lot. Let's say you give a farm tour, someone's hurt. Someone needs your product, they get hurt. It's definitely a real risk. And let's play out together how this really happens, because I have a story for you, a story about Farmer May. And this story is going to help you understand the interplay between insurance and the other aspects of what happens when people get hurt. So we've got Farmer May. Farmer May has, let's say in this case, a herd of dairy cows. Farmer May produces farmstead cheese. She creates delicious product right on her farm. It's grazing, so the scenery is terrific, and people love to come to her farm. She offers samples, it's delicious. And so one day, one of the local nonprofit advocates comes to her and says, Farmer May, will you host a volunteer thank you event on your farm? Can we come? Can we try your cheese? Can we tour the place? And Farmer May says, of course, that sounds lovely. Let's do it. So they plan this event. A bunch of friendly people show up. They bring their kids. It's a good time. And Farmer May offers to give a tour. She says, all right, anybody who wants to come, we're gonna take a tour of the barn. It's gonna be milking time soon, so let's go take a look. So a group of about 20 people, mixed ages, some kids, they all are headed towards the barn and going through. Well, there are also cows in the barn at the time, and not exactly accustomed to a group of 20 people. So things are getting a little iffy. And then at that time also, some of the youths in the group make some bad choices. One of the youths decides to start roughhousing, jumps on another kid's back. They tumble into an elderly fellow who falls, knocks into a cow. Cow ends up stepping on him. Let's call him Bob. He's an older fellow. So what do? Well, of course, we take care of Bob right away. Right away, we make sure Bob gets to, the emergency services that he needs. He goes to the hospital, he gets checked out. So Bob is talking to the doctor. The doctor says, "Oh, what happened, Bob?" And he says, "Well, I was at the farm. I was, on a tour, and I got stepped on by a cow, And the doctor makes some notes of what happened, and writes down the part about the cow because this is an odd break, and it's relevant to the medical notes. So good thing is that Bob gets patched up, and a few hours later he heads home. Farmer May and the tour organizers feel really bad, like, so sorry that Bob got hurt. They're taking care of him. They're trying to help him out. The good news is Bob is not angry. Bob understands kids roughhouse, accidents happen. So it seems like this thing is going to be fine. Is it going to be fine? If Bob isn't mad, is everybody going to be okay? Well, as you can expect, there's something more going on here. No, I'm going to venture to guess we might not be okay. Do you remember how I said that we manage risk with insurance? Well, we've got an insurance company that is coming into play here, and that's Bob's insurance company. Bob has health insurance. Bob has health insurance that he purchased over the marketplace or that he receives through his employer. When he received that insurance policy and contributed towards his premiums, et cetera, there's a number of agreements he made when he accepted that insurance. Number one is he signed over the right to sue in his own name for injuries that his health insurance company pays to treat. So as part of that, he also agreed to be interviewed by the insurance company about how his injuries happened and to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, of course. And if he lies, he risks that they will not pay for any of his treatment. So what do you know? The insurance company does call up Bob and say, "Yeah, so we're looking at those notes, the medical notes of your injury, and we've noticed that there was a cow involved, that you were on a farm. Can you tell us what happened?" So Bob tells him, "I got stepped on." And what the insurance company at that point is thinking is, well, gosh, okay, this sounds like the farm might be responsible. And maybe the farm is responsible. So the insurance company has the right to file that lawsuit and say, "Gosh, we're going to sue Farmer May because maybe she is actually responsible for this thing." So they do. They send a letter to Farmer May, and Farmer May goes to her mailbox one day and discovers that she's being sued. The letter says Bob is suing her. Did Bob somehow become angry? No. Bob's not driving the bus. Bob's health insurance company is driving the bus. They get to decide if this lawsuit is going forward and what the claim is and how this is going to happen. So Farmer May is panicking. Oh my God, am I liable for Bob's injury? Did I do something wrong? Am I going to have to pay for this? From a legal perspective, the answer is yes, she likely is responsible for some aspect of this injury if she was negligent. Whatever you think negligence might be, here's our legal definition. Negligence is acting less reasonably than the average farmer would have acted under similar circumstances. It's a very legal argument. It depends on being able to say, well, let me tell you, this is what your average farmer does. And so our attorneys would get in a room and they would argue. One side would say, oh my goodness, no one has a tour group of 20 people. That is way too large. Or no one ever takes a tour through a barn with cows actually in it that you could actually fall on. Or the other person said, the other side says, gosh, farm tours are very casual. Everybody does this. Mixed age groups, it happens all the time. Everybody is doing this. Most of the time, nothing bad happens. Who's right? A judge or a jury will decide who is right. So what do we do about that? You need an attorney. When things go wrong, you might be sued, and it's someone else's health insurance company that may be driving that, and you need to defend yourself. When most people think about insurance, they think about the pile of money that the aggrieved person gets. But that's great. That's a good benefit of insurance. But what people aren't thinking about is that insurance is like a retainer on an expert attorney. The insurance company will appoint an attorney for you, and for Farmer May in this instance, to argue that Farmer May was not negligent. Why does the insurance company do that? They don't want her to be found negligent. They're not going to have to pay. So they keep the best attorneys around ready to make their cases for them and go to bat. If Farmer May doesn't have insurance, not only does she not have that money to pay out if she is liable, she doesn't have an attorney that she's going to have to go find one. And that is going to be expensive. So think of these two values of insurance when you are thinking about liability and how to cover you for injury risk. I'm going to put my big bold statement out there that insurance is the single best risk management strategy for injury liability, and it is necessary for even the safest of farms. Many farms are very proud of their safety practices and proud that they work with people that they know and love and people who they trust. And those are great. And it's not to take away from how safe farms really are, but just to say that being safe and working with people you trust is not effective risk management, because they're not the people who will make these decisions for the most part. Sometimes they are, but very often what we have here is someone else. So this is all well and good, except that many farms do not have liability insurance that addresses the risks that they are experiencing, that covers the ways in which people are likely to get injured on their farm. In particular, basic farm liability insurance generally excludes coverage for these things: agritourism events and classes, on-farm poultry processing, like if you're below the 1,000 bird limit, value-added production, making jam, dehydrating, CSA drop sites, whether they're at a grocery store or at a coffee shop or a residential site. Food safety liability is particularly complicated to get effective coverage for. And also, don't assume that your farmers market sales are covered just because you have insurance for your farm. Anything that's off farm or non-farm is probably not covered unless you particularly asked about it and you've gotten a specific policy that addresses that, an endorsement, something else. So what do you do about this? Work with your agent. Tell your agent all the things that your farm does. Be thorough. If you do agritourism, give details. Is this free for a fee? Where are people going? What are they doing? Ask if and where coverage is provided for these activities. If you can, help them explain for you, is this an endorsement? Is this already in the policy? What's going on? And if you're not getting good answers, please consider getting a new insurance agent. Ask around, see if there's other producers in your area that have someone who seems to really get farm businesses and is ready to work with them. Okay, so that's what I've got for you on liability. We're going to take a quick transition here into property insurance. Property insurance, pretty straightforward. Folks tend to have more experience with this because so many of us are required to have property insurance, through a mortgage or some other arrangement like that. So, and it is reasonably straightforward in that you decide what property you want covered and you decide what the coverage value you want is. And that's called your declarations page. And that's where it says, we've got one cultivating tractor, we have a $2,000 worth of inventory, and we have a packing shed. Then if something bad happens, an act of God, You file a claim and the insurance company gives you the money. They give you money at the declared, at the insured value, and you can use that to go buy the new tractor, receive money for your lost inventory. But you got to be a little careful. Property insurance is quite straightforward and a lot of folks understand it, but the devil's in the details. Make note that coverage is only provided for your listed property. If you bought a new tractor 3 months ago, make sure you've got that listed. Call up your agent, tell them you bought that. If you just harvested your chickens and you've got 300 of them sitting in the freezer, make sure that you've got that inventory coverage. All right, and then make sure you know what covered risks you have coverage for. Is vandalism a concern to you? Is that something you want coverage for? What about power loss and your meat is going to thaw or something like that? So make sure that the things that weigh on you, that those are covered risks under the policy that you have. And make sure your covered values are up to date. If something has become, a barn or a building has become that much more essential to your operations, increase its value. If your equipment has become more scarce and more expensive, think about increasing your covered values. Okay, again, find an insurance agent who communicates well with you and whom you trust, and ask them for details. They are there to work with you. They want you to be happy. They want you to understand the products that you're buying. So take advantage of that. Develop a strong relationship with your insurance agent, and you can move forward with some peace that you have what you need if bad things happen. You will notice that I haven't told you to try to read your own policy. I used to say that, and then I thought, no, that's futile. That's 80 pages, 40 to 80 pages. It's written in attorney language. The better avenue is to work with the insurance agent and develop that relationship in a real human that you can talk with. Okay, now we're going to transition to some things that are not insurable and other avenues to insure for things. So this might go without saying, but as an attorney, few things go without saying. We'll say them. Okay, non-compliance or violation of regulatory obligations. These things are not insurable. Particularly what's going on here is employment law things. So we talked about injury to people, but I didn't address the specific instance of injury to your employees or workers. Generally, no coverage is provided in your traditional standard farm liability policies. They don't cover injuries to employees. And why is that? That's because that's what workers' compensation is for. Workers' compensation is an entire insurance scheme that is set up to cover worker injuries. Now, not all farms have to buy workers' compensation or have employees that will fit that definition. So in some instances, farmers really are looking for coverage for workers through a liability policy. You have to be very specific with an insurance agent if that's what you want, and it might take a little bit more time to find a policy that provides that kind of coverage. All right, but it's also really important because that's a huge avenue for risk, is injury to your employees. Note that debt, especially the personally guaranteed kind, not insurable. So we do have to, it's really important for us to also look more broadly at what is our risk management strategy, and are we making sure that we understand our obligations, that we're complying with regulations, and we're looking out for how much debt we are getting into. Now, we have a few extra tools that we should keep in mind to help make sure that we're taking a good broad view of risk management. And these are non-insurance tools. Think about forming an LLC or a corporation. Then, if we have a debt risk or we have a injury risk that is uninsured or above the limits of our insurance policy, then only our farm business assets will be available to satisfy it. Your personal assets will not be available to satisfy those debts and liabilities. So forming an LLC or a corporation is a really nice second line of defense. I recommend insurance first to cover as much as you can, but then form that LLC or that corporation so that, again, if the insurance isn't there for you in that instance, at least your personal assets are protected. An LLC, though, does not protect business assets. All of that could still get taken to satisfy a business liability. Fix vulnerability by talking about your risks with other people who have influence over them, and make sure that you have come to an agreement. Leasing relationships are really key here. For many farmers, they're by far their greatest risk exposure is that they'll lose access to the land. And because they don't own it, they lease it. And if they lose access to that land, well, then the business model often will fall apart, or at least to suffer some, sustained break before they can get going again. Think about your leasing relationship, your lease agreement as risk management. Invest in that relationship. Talk with your landlord or your tenant about what are your agreements to each other? Are they working for you? Are they what you need? Take the same perspective to your sales relationships. Price declines, someone not buying the same volume of product or demanding the same quality that they always have, being willing to pay for the quality they always have. Those are vulnerabilities too. You can address some of those with good sales relationships backed up with written contracts. Written contracts are not as conventional in farm sales agreements that are on the smaller to mid-size range. Many grocery stores don't work that way. Many restaurants don't work that way, but you can still lead the edge. And you can talk with your buyers and say, look, I want stability for you too. I want to make sure that you know what I'm able to provide day in and day out and what our expectations are together. So I have this agreement. I would love for you to take a look at it. It doesn't have to be adversarial to talk about agreements and getting them in writing. It can be a trust building relationship as well. If you farm with family, you have both joys and risks, right? Great joy, great risk. And honestly, this is probably where most of the farm killing problems happen, is when we have divorce, disagreements, and other issues between family members. Here too, written agreements can be your solution. There's nothing wrong with a written agreement between mother and daughter that spells out, these are your responsibilities, these are mine. Here's how we work together. These are the expectations, and this is how we compensate ourselves. And get that in writing, and then review it every year. It can make everybody feel better to know and to be confident in what is expected of them so that they can fulfill that. And it can be a very deep trust building exercise to talk through these relationships. Okay, good decision making. Of course, there's risk that you'll make a bad decision, but you can do some things about that too. It sounds like you've talked a lot about thorough record keeping already. I want to reiterate that. Understanding your cost of production, which depends on good record keeping, can help you really spot vulnerabilities and do something about them. And go back to those agreements, the leases, the sales. How can you again use those to cover where you are vulnerable? Keep those records so that you're in a position to buy revenue-based insurance, which Lane will tell you about, and can be really powerful for protecting your income. Consider using software to help track expenses and prepare financial reporting. All right. So I moved a little fast. I'm going to be looking at the chat next, but before we get to your questions, let's reflect. Is there anything that you learned in the last half hour about how crop and livestock insurance, liability insurance, and property insurance can help you meet your goals? Are written agreements, LLCs, and record keeping good risk management choices for your operation? Why or why not? So think about those things, and I would love to take your questions. And also know that I do have some 30-minute calendar appointments that are open and ready for you. If you want to talk about something specific to your situation, you have more in-depth questions that you'd like to talk about. But we do have time right now. Let me check the agenda. I think it's, yeah, we got 10 minutes if you have other issues you want to talk about.
I'm sorry, is everyone able to use the chat? Or I can try to ask to allow to talk also, because that might be easier. But does anyone have any kind of insurance or questions that you've been trying to explore that you could have answered now? Does anyone have any unique either situations or their current operation or how they might scale up and what new liabilities they might take on?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, hi Kyla.
Hi. I had a question. So, if we draft like a liability or consent form, and we have people coming to visit our farm, I'm not sure what our insurance policy is, but if somebody gets hurt and they sign a liability form, does that cover or does that prevent us from being sued?
That's such a good question.
It's a great question, and the short answer is no, it absolutely does not prevent you from getting sued. The waiver may have some utility while you're arguing and negotiating about who is ultimately responsible, but it's not going to stop anyone from filing a lawsuit to say you were responsible for that injury. Maybe you can come back and you can say, well, but you signed this waiver saying that you accepted these risks. And they might say, yeah, the risk that happened is not the risk that I waived in that form. You know, this is a different scenario. And at that point, you are in court, you are arguing, and you need an attorney who's going to be able to understand the argument that needs to be made, who's going to be able to explain why the waiver was effective. So waivers do not prevent lawsuits in any way. They are just a tool that people use to argue their side while in that. And I'll also say that you can, if the waiver was not drafted for you by an attorney specific to your situation, you can, it's safe to assume it's not going to work. It's not necessarily easy in many circumstances to waive liability for harm. And there are certain kinds of liability you can't waive at all, like your employees hurting someone or your employees making a bad choice that results in someone else being injured. So it's complicated, and that risk is definitely always there despite waivers.
All right, thank you. I appreciate that.
Does anybody else have farm tours or volunteers on their farms and have any questions about the right type of insurance and the affordability of that insurance, or the type of next step that you could ask I mean, maybe the insurance is not as expensive as we think, or what are some of the what's prohibiting some of us from getting insurance if we don't have it already? Is it cost? Is it that we didn't know that we had the liability? We didn't know we needed it? Can you, we have about 5 more minutes. Is there anyone else that's willing to unmute themselves and has the same kind of issue where, you know, it's something you're going to get to, you just haven't had time, you have tours, you have more events, and yeah.
Can you hear me? This is Maria.
Thank you, Maria.
Hi. Yeah, so we do tours regularly, and we do have liability insurance that we purchased. And it's through an insurance company that deals specifically with this kind of thing. And you know, for the tours, I think it's very specifically laid out in the policy, but one concern I have is that from time to time, you mentioned volunteers, for example, we'll do like volunteer harvest days where we're harvesting the cacao in this case, or just even kind of like social events where people say, oh, we'd really like to have a baby shower at your property or this or that. And I'm just, I'm just wondering, when I talked to the insurance liability agent that we use for kind of the tours, he said, oh, well, in those cases, if it's somebody else kind of organizing their event on your property, we recommend that they purchase like a one-time only event liability or something. And I guess that was just kind of confusing to me. And I didn't know, I guess I'm just wondering how effective or how comprehensive our liability really is. I mean, it just seems like there's a lot of different aspects that, kind of like you mentioned with the waivers that may or may not be covered. And I don't know. I guess I'm not sure exactly what my question is. It's just that.
That's perfect. Yeah.
When you're talking extra things, tours, baby showers, stuff like that, yes, generally not covered under an existing farm liability policy unless you're having it covered as a commercial tour giving rental based, educational site, rent this for baby showers type of policy, unless that you're paying for that. And if you're not paying for that, your insurance agent is right. There's usually an event endorsement that you can get that will cover, one event, and you keep calling them every time you have another event, keep getting another endorsement. And sure, you can pass along the cost for that, or you can expect that person to come with their own coverage as well. But if you're working with the aunties, they might be a little taken aback by having to show up with an insurance policy. So your instincts are correct. It is complicated, and there isn't one way to solve it unless you're going to really jump in the pool of being a commercial entity that really does this on the regular, and you're going to get a commercial policy written for you for such an event space.
Okay, thanks.
And I will say that they're not always that expensive, event space type policies. I mean, they certainly can be, and it depends on what your facilities are and who you are, having over. I'm unsure with, bridal shower type stuff, how that's going to land in terms of cost. But you can always have that dialogue with your insurance agent. If you get sticker shock when it comes back, you can say, is there something that is more affordable? Can I modify my business plan to find some greater affordability here, and talk with that person about what might get you a better price point.
Thanks.
Oh, and I see one quick question in the chat box about having fences or gates left open, cut open, and cattle get out. Generally speaking, cattle on roadways are a known risk that insurance companies are cognizant of, and many of them have written in coverage for that. But I'm not familiar with how that plays out in Hawaii. Certainly in the Midwest, that is a common risk. It's an understood risk, and it's a big one if it does happen. So it's fairly more common in a farm liability way. But the best way is ask the person who sold you the policy, do I have coverage for this? And if you have any doubts, say, where can I check, where is that in my policy so I can check myself?
Does anyone else have a question? Is there anyone that does non-crop related kind of activities, tours, value added, anything with resale items or nursery, things that aren't in the ground? Is there any other business kind of activities that are non-crop related that you guys have a question on before we move on with our time with Lance?
I have one more question. So I do farmers markets, and I have insurance for the farmers markets, but my farm can't be sued, right? If I have specific insurance, like separate that I have for the farmers market, like essentially that one protects the farm, right?
Well, I want to reshape your understanding. You have some protection, but I wouldn't use the phrase "you can't be sued." You can always be sued. And when you do get sued, that's when you go to your insurance company and say, we got a situation here. You know, there's a thing going on, and hopefully you've worked with your insurance agent to understand what is the process that you need to follow when there is a claim that it has been made or is threatened or something bad happens, so that you know what to do. Insurance comes in after that, but don't think about these things as we can't get sued, because that's not really how it works.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
But Kyla, are you asking about, say you rent farmland and you want to know if the farm is liable versus your business of selling like value added at a farmer's market? I don't know if this is your question or to tease it out.
Oh, it was kind of just like if I were to sell a value added products at a farmer's market, like could they take it back to like the farm and possibly try to sue the farm and you know, instead of my little small business that I got going on every Saturday?
Great question. Anybody who's potentially responsible could be sued. So that could be you in your individual capacity as a person. It could be you in your business capacity, your farm. You know, if it happened at a farmer's market, they'd probably sue all of you. You, your business, the farmer's market, whoever else it was that was hanging around. Everybody gets sued. And that's not because we're a terrible litigious society. It's because we have to figure out who is responsible. And that initiation of the process is how we find out who is responsible. And you got to have someone there who is ready to say, she didn't do it, you know, and hope that that's how it comes out. Yeah. And India, go ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm going to pass it over, but there's a quick comment about bees in the chat box. Bees, another really hard one. If you got two good quotes on that, like, you got it. That's probably all you'll get. So bees are a challenge, especially if you're doing educational events around bees. I'll add that to my list of hard to cover. All right, back to you.
Okay, thank you everyone for such good questions. And yes, there's so many different scenarios and different enterprises and operations we all have. And so next on our agenda, we have Lane. And Lane, are you able to share your screen? And again, this is on crop insurance. So those of us who have crops in the ground and Lane, this is going to hopefully be one of the first crop insurance programs that are applicable to us that we feel we can use. So like, we're like, what is this? New as of, is it 2021 or 2022?
2022. Yeah, I'm going to go over that on my first slide. So.
Okay, well, take it away. Thank you, Lane.
Awesome. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. It should be my my first slide there. Good afternoon, I guess. It's bedtime where I'm at. I come in you live from Kansas City, Missouri, or we're just east of Kansas City. But it's 8:47 p.m. here, so it's almost my bedtime. But it's a pleasure for me to be able to do this for you folks, and hopefully you'll find something that you can use in my presentation. A little bit about me. My name's Lane Webb. I do work for U.S. Department of Agriculture Risk Management Agency. I'm a risk management specialist. I've been with the agency, oh Lord, since December of 13. So however long that is, I can't do the math. I think it's 9 years now. I have been on the whole farm program basically since I joined the agency. I think it was just a luck of the draw. I was the new guy, and the 14 Farm Bill was being negotiated at the time, and so I got put on this program as we were anticipating it as within the 2014 Farm Bill. I spent 21 years in the Air Force, retired in 2011, and did a couple of odd jobs right before I joined the agency. So I went from aircraft maintenance to crop insurance. I don't know how that happened, but it did. So here I am. So my presentation, as you all know, it's going to cover the Whole Farm Revenue Protection Program and the microfarm policy. Whole Farm Revenue Protection, let me get my slides advancing here, maybe. Okay, there we go. So Whole Farm Revenue Protection was first offered in 2015, and it does provide coverage for all crops under one insurance program for diversified producers, including specialty and organic crops. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to be diversified for the program. It's just something that covers diversified producers. Microfarm, like was mentioned, it was first offered in 2022. It was offered as a streamlined approach to the whole farm revenue protection program, specifically for small producers. It was a result of the feasibility study we did on local food insurance. That was a part of the 2018 Farm Bill, one of the initiatives within the 2018 Farm Bill. After the study concluded that the easiest way to get insurance for what we call local foods producers is to make changes to the whole farm revenue protection program. So instead of making those changes, we created this, what we call microfarm. And instead of defining what a local food producer is, we define what we consider a small farm is, or microfarm, if you will. Kind of marries it up with the micro loan program that FSA offers. That's kind of how we line that up. But this is where we're at. So this slide here, what we're going to do is we're just going to highlight the both programs. Just these are 10,000 foot level highlights, and then I'll go into a little bit more specifics as we go through the slide here, the PowerPoint. So for whole farm, this is your big program that covers up to $17 million of revenue. That's insured revenue. One of the things about whole farm is post-production costs or operation expenses are not included in that insured revenue. So anything post-production value added has to be removed from that revenue for insurance purposes. Expected values set at the commodity level are primarily based on third-party sources. There's very few exceptions. If there aren't any third-party sources available for a commodity, a crop, if you will, then the policy has the ability for the producer to use their 3-year average. The expected yields for that commodity level, is basically based on either underlying policy, an approved yield policy, or the insured's 4-year average if there's no other policy out there that covers this product or commodity. The producers may purchase additional insurance crop policies. There's not a lot available out in Hawaii. I think Rachel named them. Basically, it's the Hawaii Tropical Fruit Policy, coffee, papaya. I can't remember what they all are. There's very few of them though. But if you do produce those and you have whole farm, you can also purchase that multi-peril policy to go along with that. But it must be at the buy-up coverage level. And of course, any payment that comes from those insurance policies would be included as revenue when we're working a claim for a whole farm. I'll take this opportunity for both of these programs because Rachel did mention NAP, the NAP program. NAP can be used alongside both of these programs. So NAP is not excluded as a part of this. It can run alongside. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we move forward. For microfarm, this may be the one you folks are most interested in. We created this, like I said, as a streamlined approach to whole farm with less paperwork requirements. It does insure farms with approved revenue up to $350,000 for the initial year of insurance, and of course $400,000 for any carryover policy. The piece that's different really here about microfarm versus whole farm is post-production and value-added costs may be included in approved revenue. So this is different than what Rachel had said about most insurance policies, right? They don't cover that stuff. Well, microfarm does. You can leave those costs included into that revenue for insurance purposes. Expected values here are basically, they're based on the insured's past 3-year average of total revenue and total acres. So we create an expected value for the upcoming year using the averages from the past. And for microfarm, no individual policies are allowed under this program, with the exception of NAP. Like I said, you can include NAP alongside microfarm. So what does whole farm and microfarm cover? Well, it covers revenue from all commodities produced on the farm. So this includes hemp, this includes animals and animals products, nursery products. commodities purchased for resale. Now there is a 50% limit on that. So 50% of your expected revenue, you're limited to 50% of your expected revenue from commodities purchased for resale. But you can cover that. There are a few exclusions to insurance, and that's timber, forest products, and animals for sport, show, or pets. We also do not cover trees like the tropical fruit policy does. You know, they cover tree replacement and things like that, unless you're selling trees from a nursery type operation. So under whole farm, replant coverage is provided. Typically it's for annual crops, and those crops are found in our actuarial documents on our website that would include that replant coverage. However, for microfarm, because we clump everything up together, we don't offer any replant coverage for microfarm policies. So I'm going to touch on microfarm again. You're going to see this several times. And I apologize, but that's just the way our PowerPoint is, because we focus on microfarm with this a lot. So like I said, it is a streamlined, what we consider a more accessible version of whole farm. Again, it ensures farm operations with approved revenue up to $350,000 for the initial year of insurance and $400,000 for carryover policies. Post-production value-added costs may be included in that approved revenue. Again, if you don't want to pay premium on it, we can remove it out. It's just more paperwork that has to be done in order to do so. And the example here is those farmer market type stuff, you know, the jams, the jellies, the pies made from the fruit produced on your farm operation can be, you know, those jars, pie tins, the sugar, you know, anything that's included in creating these products can be included in that insured revenue. You don't have to back that stuff out from your gross revenue. And again, the expected value is based on your past 3-year average of total revenue over total acres. So how is the amount of insured revenue determined? Well, it's basically the same for both whole farm and microfarm, and it is a lower of determination. So it's the lower of the current year's expected revenue, which is determined on the farm operation report or the farm plan at the selected coverage level, or it's your adjusted historic revenue at the selected coverage level. So it's basically what we're saying here is you will never be insured for more than your history says that you can do on average. It is what is the way that determination is made. So some of the options that come along with the whole farm and microfarm policies, it does offer flexible coverage, which is tailored to your need. So what we say in there is we offer coverage levels from 50 to 100, I'm sorry, not 100, wow, 50 to 85% coverage levels, and those are in 5% increments. Now for whole farm, a diversification of 3 commodities, the commodity count, and we'll go over that here in a couple of slides, I believe it's a couple, 3 slides from now, we'll go over this diversification piece. But for whole farm purposes, in order to get the 80 and 85% coverage level, you have to have a commodity count of 3. For microfarm, it's automatic. All coverage levels are available for microfarm producers. However, if you're familiar or not with any of our other multi-peril products, there is no catastrophic level available. And that's basically like your NAP coverage, if you will, your NAP coverage, where they offer a 50% coverage level for a little bit of nothing. I believe the fee is $655, I think is what we're offering CAT coverage now for, catastrophic coverage. But it's not available under whole farm nor microfarm. So like I said before, post-production and value added under microfarm, which includes market readiness operations, may be included in your expected prices and allowable revenue. Now for whole farm, again, post-production and value added costs must be removed from those expected prices and your allowable revenue. However, under whole farm, costs for market readiness operations may be left in that approved revenue. And what we're talking about there is I offered a brief definition here. Market readiness operations are defined as, the minimum required to remove the commodity from a field and make it market ready. and it must be on the farm, in the field, or in close proximity to the field. And maybe I don't know what so let's say the herb producer, right? You take your herbs, you pick them, you wash them, and you bag them, or you tie them off, or however you package them. You wouldn't have to remove those extra costs, to get it to market from your revenue. You'd be able to keep those in. You can remove it if you don't want to pay the premium, but those can be left in. You don't have to back that stuff out. So what causes a loss payment under whole farm and microfarm? Well, natural causes of loss and decline in market price. And like Rachel said, basically it's unavoidable natural causes. I don't know if it's hurricanes or tsunamis or typhoons out in Hawaii, I can't remember, but whatever the big water wave comes through, any unavoidable natural cause that can cause a loss, and also a decline in market price during the insurance period. Now, in order to get paid under whole farm and or microfarm, this is the unfortunate piece, and we're looking at ways to change this. I don't know if it's going to happen much, but in order to get paid, you have to file your taxes before you can submit a claim. And of course, then we do the evaluation. We work the claim, and if your revenue to count for the policy year or the insurance period is lower than your insured revenue, of course, a loss payment would be made. So here's where we're talking about diversification and how it matters whole farm and microfarm. So the diversification measure determines eligibility under whole farm to 80 and 85% coverage levels. And again, like I said, for microfarm, all coverage levels are available. So talking about commodity count here, and this is really how we determine diversification. You may be producing 2 or 3 or 4 commodities. However, there's a calculation that determines percent of revenue over those 4 commodities, or 3 or 2. I'm going to give an example of 2. Let's say you have one commodity A, we'll call it, and that drives or brings in 95% of your revenue, and you have a second commodity that you're producing, and it only produces 5% of your revenue. So in that instance, and based on the calculation, you would only have a commodity count of 1. So what we're looking for is diversification across commodity and revenue. Now, take those same 2 commodities, one of them's producing 80% of the revenue, another 20% of the revenue. Now, is based on the calculation, you would have a commodity count of 2. So that's how that is determined. It's a very intense calculation within the policy and procedures. But that's how we determine diversification and some of these eligibility things that are determined on that. So like I said, for whole farm, you have to have a commodity count of three in order to be eligible for 80 and 85%. Microfarm, we automatically give you the 3. You're automatically eligible for 80 and 85% coverage levels. Now, additional diversification requirements under the whole farm policy. If you're a potato farmer, I don't think they grow a lot of potatoes out in Hawaii, but if you were growing potatoes, you must have a commodity count of 2 to be eligible for whole farm, because legislation requires potato farms. Well, legislation actually disallows revenue coverage under potato farm or on potato farms. And also, if there's a revenue coverage available, none in Hawaii. Any revenue coverage available in Hawaii, so you really don't have to worry about that. But if there was another revenue coverage available for one of your commodities, you'd have to have a commodity count of 2 as well. So other diversification things for whole farm and microfarm, it also determines the amount of discount that you would see on your premium rate. So for whole farm purposes, we offer diversification discounts for commodities from 2 to 7. You max out your diversification discount at 7 commodities or more. So it does reduce the premium being paid by the producer. For microfarm, that is a set amount. Like I said, we're set it to 3, and that's the discount. And it also determines, for whole farm purposes, basically, whether or not you receive the whole farm premium subsidy or not. Now, the whole farm premium subsidy is set at 80% up to 75% coverage level. I will show you a chart that kind of goes through that here in just a minute. Now, that is automatic again for microfarm because, again, we have determined that for microfarm, your commodity count basically is set to 3. So you're diversified to the point that you're eligible for everything under microfarm. Now, this next chart that I'm going to show you kind of walks you through what that diversification, what that subsidy level looks like. So for microfarm, you're really looking at the middle line here. If this is what, I'm sorry, I clicked. Sorry about that. So that middle line, or well, really the third line, a whole farm subsidy with a qualifying commodity count of 3 or more under the microfarm policy, that would be the line item that you would be looking at. So as you can see, up to 75% coverage level, which is that top line, you would get the 80% subsidy, meaning that as a producer, you would only pay 20% of your premium. The federal government would pay the other 80%. Now, if you elected 80 and 85% coverage level, that subsidy level goes down a little bit based on the amount of coverage that we're providing. So that's what you would be looking at. Now, if you're a whole farm producer with only 2 commodities, you're only eligible for 75% coverage, but you maxed out at your subsidy level. And I've worked up some numbers just so you kind of guys get an idea of what we're talking about there. And I can show it at the end what I was talking about. I did a cost estimator for Honolulu County in Hawaii there. And for a basic $100,000 farm operation at the 75% coverage level, which would be $75,000 in coverage, you're looking at producer paid premium at like $1,080 is basically what you're looking at. That's what you'd be looking for. I think it's right around $2 up for every $100 of coverage is what you would be looking at. And I can show you what that cost estimator would look like across all the coverage levels. Premium paid subsidy.
Sorry, can we, is there any questions at this point right now looking at this chart? And yeah, I don't know if you guys are able to unmute yourself or chat, but just to break this up and trying to understand applicability to some of our size operations, there is a chat of, is that $1,080 annual? But yeah, just trying to understand, say we're at a certain revenue with one commodity, what might be the cost with a certain coverage? Thank you.
Yeah, no, so perfect. So I'll just go ahead and bring up the cost estimator now, just so you can kind of see it. So hopefully you can see that, my internet screen there now. So I did this is just basic numbers. I just did even numbers, $100,000 of history and $100,000 of expected revenue for the year. And you can see here at the 75% coverage level, this is what the producer would have to pay for insurance coverage for the year. So yes, that would be correct. It would be the annual payment. Now that may change annually. Of course, insurance goes up, insurance goes down, depending on, risk and payouts and things like that. But for 2023, that's what it would be looking at. So for $100,000 farm, $75,000 in coverage, basically 75% coverage level, you're looking at $1,080. And of course that goes up. The higher coverage level, it goes down the lower coverage level.
And real quick, so just say, so you have to file your taxes from the previous year and show a history of $100,000 revenue coming in, and maybe have a projected, be able to have your projected budget at that amount. Nothing's changing. What's that process that we'd work with? So say someone wanted to buy a 75% policy, 75% coverage, and they're going to pay that anticipated amount annually. What's that? Can you walk us through that process for them of when they contact your department? So it's not through a private insurance agent, it's through, would they be working through their local FSA and sitting down and
we're gonna talk through that as we go through the PowerPoint.
Okay,
just a little
sorry
bit.
about that.
The paperwork requirements, who you would contact, and things like that, and what kind of stuff you may need, and when you would get billed, and things like that. We're going to talk about that as we go through.
Okay, thank you guys. Is there any other questions at this time? Just trying to, so this is really helpful to have some numbers. So if we're making a $100,000 revenue, this is what how is the subsidy determined?
So the subsidy, that's a good question. The subsidy is set. So for microfarm, your subsidy level is determined based on your coverage level. So as you can see, well, you can't see right now. I'm going to try to go back to my PowerPoint. So as you can see on the PowerPoint there, your whole farm subsidy level is set. So for microfarm, and this is for microfarm only, right? This bottom line is what you would be, your subsidy level is. So Congress determines the subsidy. So that's how the subsidy is determined, okay? The Congress does that for us. And then we apply it across coverage levels. And as you can see, if you stop at the 75% coverage level, you earn an 80% subsidy, meaning the federal government will pay 80% of your premium. No matter what that dollar amount is, it's 80% of the calculated premium for your farm operation. It could be, you know, like I said, your premium could be $1,080. It could be less than that. It depends on the amount of dollars of insurance that you're going to get for your farm operation. It's specific. So it's determined. This chart is what it looks like. This is it for microfarm. Now for whole farm, it could be any one of these three line items, right? So if you only have one commodity and you choose micro or whole farm, then you're looking at a lower subsidy level. You're looking at the basic subsidy level. And then if you have two, of course, two or more under whole farm, you get the whole farm subsidy, and that's at 80%.
And so if you had a 75% coverage plan, and we're saying that at the current, you know, $100,000 revenue would be an estimated 1,080 annually, the federal government would pay 80% of that 1,080.
No, that's the producer paid amount.
Oh, okay.
That's how much the producer will be responsible for. It's it's almost like $4,200, I think, for actual premium for that farm. And the government's picking up 80% of that, leaving the 1,080 for the producer. Okay.
Does anybody have any other questions at this time on that part? And I assume we're going to get into, like you mentioned, the paperwork, the process, and kind of like describing how you'd submit a claim and how that would work.
So I'll answer Anissa's third question there. Is there a minimum revenue that would be eligible for coverage? No, there's not. There's only a maximum amount that we're going to be covering. So there's no minimum. We don't require a minimum number of acres, a minimum number of revenue, a minimum number of commodities or anything like that. All of our limits are maximum, basically. Our limits are maximum until you get into that whole farm revenue protection policy. And then we have a few minimums based on other available programs, if that makes sense. And in Hawaii, like I said, you don't have any revenue coverage out there. So you wouldn't have to worry about that. You probably don't grow potatoes out there as your sole commodity if you grow any at all. So you wouldn't really have to worry about that too much. But for microfarm, no minimums. It's only maximums. So that's a good question too. So her last question, are fruit trees considered forest products? I tried to cover that in my second slide, I believe, or third slide, I can't remember. So fruit trees, if you have fruit trees for the production of fruit, you're not selling the trees, we don't cover that under whole farm because there's no revenue from the tree, it's from the fruit. We're only covering the commodity grown on the tree. But if you have a nursery item, or if like you're selling trees, you're growing fruit trees and selling them as a potted or as a transplant or something like that, then yes, we could cover that as a nursery item, if that makes sense. But if you just have trees just for the purpose of production of whatever fruit's grown on the tree, then that we cover the fruit, not the tree. Hopefully that answered your question. Got it. Yeah, very good. Okay, I want to move on then. So this next slide is specific to whole farm only, but here we go, limits for qualification, right? So this kind of goes to Anissa's question, and my non-answer, if you will. So for whole farm, we do have limits. We have maximum limits. So like I said, it covers up to $17 million of revenue. There are some limits within that. $2 million of coverage for animals and animal products, and that excludes aquaculture commodities, as well as the nursery greenhouse commodities as well. There's a $2 million limit on that. And those also exclude aquaculture commodities. I think in 2021 or 22, I think it was 2021. I can't remember. We've made so many changes, but we removed aquaculture from the definition of animals, animal products, and nursery products. So aquaculture stands alone, and that limit is no longer applicable there. So for nursery, and this kind of goes back to this question, products that would would normally be insured under a nursery policy would be the best way to see it. And it doesn't include some items that are grown in hoop houses. And our example that we use here is tomatoes. If you're growing tomatoes in a hoop house for the purpose of the selling the tomatoes, the fruit, then the tomatoes we've covered. If you're growing tomato plants for the purposes of selling those plants, then those would be considered nursery items, and that would fall within that $2 million limit. Now, these limits don't apply to microfarm because, again, there's only that $350,000 limit already, so you wouldn't even get there with nursery and or animals. And that chart there just kind of shows you what the max allowable approved revenue could be for a selected coverage level. So we could under whole farm insure a farm operation that makes $34 million a year. Now their coverage would be set at the 50% level, but we could do it. The policy is written as such, it could happen. And as you can see, that revenue goes down as the coverage level goes up. So this is where I take a little bit of a breath, and I kind of recap some of the things that we've already talked about and some things that we're going to continue to talk about. It's basically the second slide all over again, but just kind of reminding folks of the benefits of the whole farm microfarm program, how it provides coverage for a wide variety of crops, includes crops that some folks haven't even heard of before, or have individual coverage under one crop insurance policy. Again, under a whole farm, I'm going to kind of just briefly touch on it. Covers up to $17 million in revenue. Post-production costs or value-added costs must be removed. Expected values are primarily based on third-party sources. Yields are based on underlying policies, or in this case, probably for you would be insured the 4-year average. And you can purchase individual crop policies at the buy-up coverage level under the whole farm policy. Now for microfarm, I'll touch on these a little bit more. Again, streamlined, more accessible, less paperwork requirements. That's been a goal for both farm bills that I've been a part of, was how can we make whole farm require less paperwork? Well, microfarm is part of that process, right? So we took out like inventory reports and expense reporting, and we took out a lot of the reports that you have to complete in order to get a microfarm policy. It ensures farm operations with approved revenue up to $350,000 for a first year of insurance, and if you're a carryover policyholder, it's $400,000. Kind of built in an expanding operation there, which we'll talk about here in just a minute. A big difference here, post-production value-added costs may be included in the approved revenue. So that's a big change for the microfarm policy. Again, less paperwork involved. Automatically eligible for the 80 and 85% coverage levels. Expected values are based on the producer's past 3-year average revenue and acres. And again, no individual crop policies would be allowed, with the exception of NAP. It's not really an individual coverage policy, but it's an FSA program. NAP is not included in that exception there. So we talk about historic revenue. If you don't remember, we talked about how the insurance is determined by the lesser of your historic average or your expected farm revenue moving forward. There are sometimes that historic revenue may be adjusted under the policy, and this is true for whole farm and microfarm. So, excuse me, I'm sorry. So historic revenue, there's 2 different ways that we can adjust your historic average up, if you will. One of them is what we call indexing, and that's an automatic adjustment based on a calculation for farms that grow year over year. And so basically, if one of your last 2 years in your history is greater than your average historic revenue, then an automatic indexing calculation kicks in. It kind of factors inflation, if you will, prices going up and down, stuff like that. So it could allow your historic average to be bumped up some, to go up by a certain factor. Now, the second way farms can grow, of course, is by expansion. Typically, this is through added acreage, added hoop houses, or capacity. We're talking about capacity here, basically. If your production capacity goes up in some form or fashion, then you could possibly be approved for an expansion up to 35% of your historic average. Now, of course, the insurance companies have to approve that based on the paperwork provided by you and things like that. But I think for microfarm, and I still got to correct this, for microfarm, this does not apply. For microfarm, we built in an expansion for that second year up to that $400,000. So we're looking in maybe possibly changing this moving forward, because we didn't really think that through when we created this provision. But for whole farm purposes, you can expand up to 35% over your historic average. Now, there are other options out there, and this is where your premium kind of can go up and things like this, is when you start choosing these options. And this is to account for bad years. So, you may have 1 or 2 years in your history where you took a huge loss or something to that effect. So we have, in 2020, we created 3 options to kind of help alleviate that pain, if you will, in a low historic average over the course of years. The first one is revenue substitution. And what that is we look at your simple average, we take 60% of that number. And if any of your historical numbers fall below that 60%, then we can substitute it for that 60% number and re-average. I know that was a lot, but it's basically what it says. It's a revenue substitution. We take anything below that 60% of your average, replace it with your 60% of your average, and we recalculate your historic average. Revenue exclusion, basically what it is, we take the lowest year within your history, we drop it, recalculate your average based on 4 years. And I'll talk about number of years here in a little bit. So I'm talking about 5 and 4 and 3 years. It's all based on a 5-year history, and that's what we're looking at. So revenue exclusion, we would remove the lowest year in your history, recalculate your average based on 4 years. And then the 90% cup is basically for carryover producers, for carryover insureds. We look at your last year's approved revenue, 90% of that number, and we don't allow your approved revenue to drop below that number if you choose that option. Sorry, I got a cough. I'm going to mute real quick. Couldn't find my mute button, sorry. So excuse me, sorry about that. So it only clicked one slide. Okay, so this is where I'm getting into that question, right? What information is required? Well, for whole farm, 5 years of farm tax records, basically. For 2023, for whole farm revenue protection, we're looking at 2017 through 2021 tax years. That we would be looking for those tax forms for whole farm revenue protection. There is a lag year, so the year prior to, so for 2023, we wouldn't be asking for your 2022 tax records to determine what your average is, your historic average. We're looking at 2017 through 2021, and that's for calendar and early fiscal year filers. You back all that up 1 year is 2016 through 2020 for late fiscal year filers, and those are individuals or operations that file their taxes, their tax year starts on 1 September or later. Everyone else from 1 August and back to 1 January would be the calendar early fiscal year filers. So we're looking at different years based on your tax filing situation. Now, there are exceptions to this 5-year rule, and those are veteran or beginning farmers or ranchers, or applicants that qualified as a veteran or beginning farmer rancher in a previous year. And so basically for a veteran or beginning farmer rancher, we're looking at 3 years of tax history, including your lag year. So you need a minimum of 4 years to get started there. And there's other exceptions. A qualifying person is not required to file a U.S. tax return. Of course, we wouldn't be looking for tax records there. We would just be looking for documentation from a third-party entity type of things. And there's those producers that were physically unable to farm for 1 year. So we wrote that in. You know, some people get sick, they're not able to farm for 1 year. They had to file a 0 on their tax return for farm revenue. So we allow a 0 to be included in your history, as long as it isn't your first year of history. Now for microfarm, it's a little bit different. We're only at a minimum, we're looking for 3 years of farm tax forms. This includes your lag year, no lag year in microfarm, basically. So for 2023, we would be going 22, 21, and 20 is what we would be looking for tax forms to set you up for a policy under microfarm. Now, we take those 3 years, we build a 5-year history. There's procedures to do that. So you always have a 5-year history, but it's based on 3 years. And then you build up to that 5-year history and just carry it forward and carry it forward. So a minimum of 3 years for microfarm is what we're looking for. So 3 years of farm experience. Other information that may be required for whole farm and or microfarm. So for whole farm, it is a commodity level reporting plan that we do. So information about what will be produced on your farm during the insurance period would be required. Those are specific commodities, you know, what your expected yield, your expected prices would be for that, and things like that. How many acres you're going to grow it on and such. Now for microfarm, it's a little bit different. We do not ask for commodity level reporting in microfarm. We clump everything up together. Like I said before, it's total revenue and total acreage over the last 3 years is what we're looking at. We average those two, we divide, we come up with an expected value per acre for your farm plan for the coming year. And like I said, all this information is used to complete your intended farm operation report, which is your expectations for the year, your farm plan per se. So other information that you may be asked for by your crop insurance agent or your company, supporting records for any of this information, an organic certification if you're claiming organics, inventory or accounts receivable type information, and we'll kind of go over that here in just a little bit when we're talking about inventories and stuff like that, accounts receivable, and why we would be asking for stuff like that. I'm assuming that no one is familiar with whole farm, haven't been familiar with whole farm, but a big change we made for 2023 was we erased the expense reporting requirement under whole farm. Most crop insurance agents and producers considered it burdensome and way too much paperwork. So we reduced the paperwork burden by removing the expense reporting. Not to say that your Schedule F, if you are filing a Schedule F, you can remove those expenses from your Schedule F. We don't take redacted Schedule F, so you still have to show us your expense reporting on your Schedule F. We're just not doing a whole lot with it unless we got to, adjust your revenue by post-production costs and things like that. So what's the timeline for whole farm and microfarm? So sales typically begin around September 1st. That's when we release the policy and materials on August 31st or before. So September 1st, sales begins. The last day to purchase is the sales closing date for Hawaii. I believe that date is 3/15. I believe me and Logan went through that the other day. It's March 15th is your county and or state specific sales closing date. So you need to see an agent prior to March 15th. well before March 15th if you're looking for insurance coverage. And I say well before because there may be some paperwork you may need to gather. I would say now would be the time you need to contact an insurance agent for crop insurance because you never know. You don't want to walk in on March 14th or 15th or call that and say, hey, I want to get crop insurance. I mean, it would be difficult to get an application and everything done by then. So this is when your intended farm operation report would be completed, your farm plan, your expectation for the year. This is when your agent would ask for some paperwork, tax records and things like that to make determinations, to get your application filled out and things like that. So that'd be by your county specific, in this case, the state specific sales closing date, which is March 15th of this year. Now, come July 15th is when your revised farm operation report would be due. For those that aren't familiar with crop insurance, this would basically be the report saying, okay, this is what I've done for the year up until now, and this is what I still plan to do coming up in the year if you haven't done it already. We call it the acreage report, if you will, but it's the revised farm operation report, reporting what you have done already and what you still intend to do as the year moves on. Moving on with the timeline, billing date, it's August 15th for everyone. That's where your premium is determined. Not due on that time. There's another date that it's due. I don't know exactly when it's due. Typically at claim time, it would be when it would be due. They basically offset your claim by your premium. I think that's usually the way it works. I would get with your crop insurance agent to make sure that holds true. So billing date, so your premium, your summary of coverage, whatever you want to call it, would be due, would come out August 15th for everyone. And then come claim time or next year when you're signing up for your next insurance policy, that's when your final farm operation report would be completed. And like I said, it's due at the time of loss determination when you're filing a claim or next policy year sales closing date. And we set those dates to basically just say, hey, you need to turn this in. It's basically a report that says, okay, this is what my farm did all year. This is how much revenue I earned across all the commodities that I was growing. And of course, if you don't complete that by the time given for the next year's crop insurance policy, then you're limited to 65% coverage level. We just set a consequence to it. So this is kind of where we get into other things that you may need to understand about whole farm and micro farm, and this is when we're talking about what revenue is actually covered under whole farm during the insurance period. So we're looking at the term produced. So basically, if it's considered produced, let's say your tax year, your insurance year is January 1 to December 31st. That's when that's your typical tax year insurance period. If it's considered produced, which means it's marketable, it's saleable, still hanging on the tree, wherever it is, if that product or that commodity is considered saleable and or marketable on the last day of insurance, 12/31, it's considered revenue for the insurance year. And that's what we're talking about. A commodity not harvested or sold will count as revenue. If it's still hanging on the tree, if it's still in the field, if it's in storage somewhere, wherever that may be, but it was produced in the current year, then we're going to include it as revenue when we're working a claim for the policy, if there was a loss in the year. So we're including that as revenue. We're going to put a value on it, and we're going to include it as revenue earned, if you will. That's your accounts receivable, right? So basically, a commodity grown last year and sold this year will not be covered. So if you're carrying over inventory, if you will, commodity inventory from year to year, your beginning inventory at that point would be adjusted out of your revenue to count for a claim, if that makes sense. So we're not covering anything that's in storage beginning on January 1st. We don't cover that. The policies do not cover that. So for commodities that grow each year, like cattle or whatever livestock that may be, only the growth for the insurance year counts for insurance purposes. So our example here is a calf worth $800 at the beginning of the year on January 1st, expected to be sold for $2,000 sometime within the year. The value of insurance would only be $1,200. That would be that carryover. So we don't include carryover value, only what would be grown or earned within the insurance period. Inventories, and like I said, inventories and accounts receivables are used to determine this produced amount, if you will, revenue to count at claim time. Only applicable to claim time, really, is what we're looking for when we do some adjustments on your end of year revenue. So other facts to understand about microfarm and whole farm. Under whole farm, we created this combined direct marketing commodity code under microfarm, under whole farm, and we basically use that same procedure and or methodology for microfarm. So any commodities that are direct marketed or fall under the microfarm are determined by the previous 3 years average of allowable revenue and acreage for all commodities produced on the farm. And that's kind of what I've said for microfarm. Your expected value is based on the last 3 years of average revenue, your average revenue over the last 3 years and acres as well. Again, post-production value-added revenue may be included in allowable revenue and expected prices under microfarm only, not whole farm. So this is kind of where we get into, I know Rachel mentioned farmers markets and direct to the consumer stuff. This is where whole farm and or microfarm would cover that. So we do cover those market streams, if you will, because you produce it on your farm. So if it's a commodity produced on your farm, it's a value-added product made from those commodities produced on your farm, then we would cover it under as insured revenue. Other things about whole farm, prices and yields used to value commodities to be grown must meet the expected value and yields guidelines in the policy. Values must be what producers can reasonably expect to receive in the local area for the commodity. And that, of course, is based to the extent possible on third-party sources. There's other sources out there. Marketing contracts is one of those sources. So if you have a marketing contract in place with, say, a grocery store or one of your consumers, then that market price would take precedence over any of the third-party source. Excuse me. Yields must be what the producers can reasonably expect to produce under normal growing conditions for that commodity. The first bullet, you don't really have to worry about it. I'll say it for commodities also covered under another plan of insurance. The approved yield for the underlying policy will be your yield for whole farm. Otherwise, it's based on the 4-year average yield of that commodity based on your farm operation, with replacement yields being plugged in where you don't have history for that commodity when allowed by the policy. Last but not least, how do I get crop insurance? Contact a crop insurance agent. I actually did a Google search. I didn't do a Google search. I actually went to this link right here and I looked for your closest insurance agent for crop insurance, and it's in Clovis, California. But you can go to this link and plug in your city and state and see where your insurance agent, that's the only one as far as I know. Unless somebody knows anything different, but that's what our website says. I actually went and looked. I don't remember what the name of the person was, but there's one agent. There's 3 in the U.S., 1 on the West Coast, 2 on the East Coast that service Hawaii from our website. So that's where you would go. That's who you would speak with about these programs. I believe I did give Logan this PowerPoint, so she can provide that link as well. But it's on RMA's website. It's one of our top links at the very top of the page there. But that's who I would recommend you speak with about your certain situations, whether or not you're eligible or not, and things like that. When you want to talk about crop insurance, would be a crop insurance agent. And of course, whole farm team contacts. That's me up top. My policy guy is Griffin Schnitzler. His email is there as well. If you want to contact the entire team, and this is who I'd prefer, you can email me directly. I don't care. Whole farm team. That third email there goes directly to everybody on the team. So if you have questions and I may not be available, then someone else may be able to answer the question for you. And with that, that's the end of my presentation, and I will be happy to sit around, for as long as I need to answer questions that I can answer. I'll do my best.
This is great. Thank you so much, Lane. I think, understanding what kinds of crops and that it covers nursery production, livestock. This is really helpful. Is there any questions and I also want to mention that we have Tracy Adams on the call, and I would like to have all questions about the micro whole farm revenue program in general. So any questions about that, but Tracy, I don't know if you're able to offer that program as well. I know Land, one of the issues is that a lot of our it's hard for us to find agents, and when we look on the tool, it's out of California, and it's one or two. So thank you for stepping up. Tracy, maybe you could speak to that really quickly, and then we could have questions about the micro whole farm revenue program, because I think we do have people selling trees. We have different crops. We have, different situations, different inventory. And
so as far as the government crop insurance program, I think that's always going to be a standalone program for farmers that may not qualify for a private insurance program. What we are currently working on is to take it private using a private insurance company. And we're still in the design mode with them of coming up with and it will be Hawaii based specifically. So once that design comes, then I'll have better news and information for you guys in that respect. But for now, I think the program that Lane is talking about with the revenue protection and stuff is going to be the go-to program for at least a few more months for Hawaii anyway.
I like to speak one more thing about that. I just need, I guess, maybe to explain if you're not familiar with the Federal Crop Insurance Program. So FCIC, the Federal Crop Insurance Corporation, which is RMA, basically, we administer the actual program. So we interpret the rules, we write the rules, we write the procedures. There are 15 or 17. It changes from day to day based on acquisitions and mergers and things like that. But we have about 15 insurance providers, private companies that actually sell the products. So all of our companies have to sell it or have to offer it. Finding an agent that's willing to sell it is a different story, but all of our insurance companies are required to offer these two programs, and it should be available to anyone that asks about it. It's, again, like you said, finding that agent that may be willing to sell it and work with you may be difficult, but hopefully you'll be able to find somebody that would be able to do that. So I think that's so, like RMA, we don't sell it. We just write the rules and procedures. We administer the program. We have private companies that are contracted with the federal government through the standard reassurance agreement that actually sell the product, and they work the claims. They underwrite, and they're the underwriters. We are the reinsurers. So I think I just needed to explain that a little bit, just so people understand how federal crop insurance works and what it's all about.
Yeah, I think a good comparison would be to FEMA's the National Flood Insurance Program, where you have a government agency that backs a program, but the program's administered through private insurance companies. They handle the claims, they handle the underwriting, the application, you pay a premium to them. And, then the government steps in and writes the check essentially through the insurance company. So
Right.
The crop insurance program that, we're trying to bring to Hawaii would be similar in that respect. It's just there isn't one. There's one right now is very interested. We're just trying to iron out the kinks of how they would go about doing it here.
And I guess one more offer of information there is the rates don't change no matter what company you go with here. So we set the rate. the companies sell it at our rate. They can't discount that rate. It is what it is. So the 1,080 that you would pay would be the 1,080 you would pay no matter what private insurance company, approved insurance provider was going to sell it to you. Same dollar. All right. That's all
really
I have
helpful.
about,
No,
yeah.
that's really helpful to know. And, I think we've been kind of a desert here as far as being able to get insurance and having, agents to work with. So we really, are appreciative of that. Is there any questions right now from anybody as far as wanting to understand, what the great content that Lane put out? Is there any specific questions regarding your crops, or, how you might file, or how you might, is there any, you can either chat directly or just unmute yourself. But this is, we don't have a lot of farms who have gone through with crop insurance. So we're really excited about micro whole farm. Is there anyone that would be interested in checking this out for either a crop in the ground, say cacao you've got, or ulu you have, or is there anyone that's interested in potted plants through a nursery, or anyone with any other scenario? Can you guys chat out a few scenarios of crops that you're interested in covering? And again, to clarify, this is market and this is act of God or natural disaster. This is not theft. Thank you guys. And I know it's really late, Lane. So if there's no questions, we can move on. That was a lot of great information. It seems like, yeah, I didn't realize, so much was covered. Do any of us on the call today know if there's any insurance that covers theft? Like, how would that be? And is that an issue? If I can hear from our participants really quick, what are your main concerns with coverage? Is it crop damage to natural disaster? Is it market decline? I think what you said, Lane, was really helpful to hear, that if we had a contract grow, if we had that established market price, that would be, pretty important to establish what loss we might be going through. But is there, yeah, so Lane, I don't know if you can read that as well.
Oh yeah, I'm reading the last two comments. Yeah, so yeah, and that's the thing. So like with a marketing contract, you basically lose the price protection at that point because you're guaranteed, well, you should be, based on our definition of marketing contract. We have a specific definition that must meet in order to be determined a market contract. So you really lose the price protection on a marketing contract because it's a promise to buy, a promise to sell at a certain price. But from a natural disaster, an unavoidable natural disaster, and it could be anything. We say adverse weather, which could be anything, right? Too hot, too cold, too wet, too dry, too windy. It could be anything. Everything that you experience in Hawaii, we cover for the most part. Plant disease, animal disease, all that is covered under the whole farm program.
So Marie, you had a good question there. A pest or fungal disease that takes out your cacao crop, would that be covered? And how would that work?
So I'd have to look at the policy again. I know it's a tough one. Possibly, it just depends. I think we do cover, as long as you have done what you can possibly do, all the recommended. So you get into good farming practice, right? So if you're going to have pests or you're going to have fungus, but you don't treat for it, then probably not going to be covered. However, if you have done everything that has been recommended, that's a good farming practice for your crop, and it still happens, then it could be a covered cause of loss. Absolutely. Or if, your crop had it prior to insurance, they have to take things like that into consideration. Was it already diseased? Did it already have issues type stuff? Those are things for the perennial type crops. Those are things that kind of come into play when we talk about insurability, things like that.
I see that. Yeah, you feel like you could have used it, Ashley, for your crop loss last year. So yeah, as far as so actually, let's just use you as a case study really quick. And, a lot of this, we're going to plan to promote this program more, Lane, because we're really interested in this. And also, what would be your ideal farmer that could take advantage of this? But as your case study, Ashley, I don't know if you're able to unmute yourself, but.
Yes. Hi.
Hi, Ashley.
Hi. Yeah, we had like a pretty big crop loss of Lisianthus last year, and I don't know. Maybe we didn't do everything we could have possibly done to prevent it, but yeah, that's only like we're so small and diversified that like there's never one that was like probably one of our biggest like losses in one go.
Yeah, and you kind of said it right, Ashley, because you're diversified. Well, you're diversified for a reason, right? You're diversified to mitigate your losses because you take one crop loss, but then you have all these others to kind of back up with, right? You hoping the market kind of takes off with those or whatever that may be, right, to kind of cover that loss and that you had. But that's the type of producer that the microfarm is built for, right? Knowing that diversification is your biggest mitigator, right? And it's not just one crop loss that may affect or may cause a loss payment or an indemnity payment. It's the whole farm. How did the whole farm do? Because one crop may go bad, but then you got three others that kind of pick up the slack, if you will, and kind of eat into that deductible a little bit. So and that's, I guess, what you have to kind of understand is it's a whole farm loss, not necessarily an individual crop loss that could, that would determine whether or not an indemnity would be paid or not.
So it's just done at the end of the year.
I'm sorry.
You just apply at the end of the year.
Yeah. So you, so the way it works and just basic insurance concept, right? You buy insurance at the beginning of the year. Let's say you've got coverage that starts on January 1st. Your insurance period lasts all the way until December 31st. And I don't know what the weather is in Hawaii. I know what the weather is in Hawaii, but you say you take a huge rain early or late in the crop year, right? Well, if you think that may prevent you from earning the expected revenue for that crop or for your farm, at that point, within 72 hours, you need to report it right to your agent. Say, hey, took a huge rain, flooded out, a third of my acres or whatever it could have been, right? So you have to report it as a cause of, as a notice of loss. So you have to, there's a 72-hour requirement to report any cause of loss that could have affected your revenue for the end of the year. And then at the end of the year, after you file your taxes and things like that, because, well, that notice of loss, what it does, it gives an insurance adjuster time to go out and inspect. Did the cause of loss actually happen? What happened to your land or your crop, or what happened, right? What kind of effect could it have had, just to verify it happened, and yeah, it destroyed or whatever it did, right? But it happened. And then when you file your taxes, you say, oh, my revenue, I took a huge loss, or I took a loss. So now I'm going to submit my claim. Now my claim is, I had $75,000 in coverage. I only earned, based on my tax records, what I can see, I earned $60,000, right? Or maybe you earned $70,000, whatever that may have been. You submit your claim for that potential loss. And then again, the adjuster comes out, looks at your tax records, does all the adjustments that have to be made to that revenue. And then based on insured revenue and your revenue to count at that time, based on your tax records and what's left and, what hasn't been sold and things like that, they determine your revenue to count for the year. And then that insured minus revenue to count equals your indemnity payment if it's a positive number, of course. Does that make sense? So
yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
So, I mean, it could be one huge crop loss that really did you in for the year, but it could have been 2 or 3 events as well over 2 or 3 crops. But you have to report each loss, each event, I guess, if you will. And that gives, like I said, that gives the adjuster, the insurance company, time to verify that, yes, the event happened. I can verify it happened in this area of Ashley's farm, right? And then we kind of just move from there. So I'm going to name. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I have one more question. Like, is it similar to like car insurance, where you make the claims kind of like count against you? Eventually, you just can't get
No.
insurance anymore.
Oh, that's a very good question. No, it doesn't. Well, that's a good question, and I'm going to roundabout the answer, right? Specifically for you, no. So your loss, your payouts do not affect you personally each and every year, right? Over time, though, as we review rates, which we do, periodically, if we see higher indemnities coming out or a higher loss ratio over time in certain areas, then yes, rates are adjusted for that area. But it not only affects you, but it affects everyone in that area, right? Because the rates, they could go up, they could go down. If we're seeing,
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, if we're seeing higher indemnities, less premium, you know what I'm saying? Because that's how it's all determined, right? It's indemnities based on premium. We see that loss ratio hovering around that 1 or over that 1 point whatever, then yeah, we probably need to adjust some rates a little bit, because we're not collecting enough money, if you will, to cover the loss. So that's where your rate adjustments come in. So no, personally, your losses, your indemnity payouts, your farm does not affect you. Your claims do not affect you like car insurance do personally. It's over time with periodic reviews of rates, but it's for the county or for the area, if you will, regionally. It could be for anything, and it could be for specific commodity levels, right? It may not be for all commodities, just these commodities. So you'll see different rates, maybe every year. You just don't know. So that's the roundabout answer to that. So I want to read out the causes of loss for whole farm revenue protection, which is also micro farm, just so you kind of get an understanding. I don't want to jump over my time, but just so you kind of get an understanding of what we cover and what we consider unavoidable natural causes, right? Adverse weather conditions. Just think about it. If it's adverse to your farm, it's adverse, right? Fire, insects. Again, there's a but, not damage due to insufficient or improper application of pest control measures. That's where that good farming practice comes in, right? Plant or animal disease, again, but not damage due to insufficient or improper application of disease control measures. Again, good farming practice. Earthquakes, volcanic eruptions. I don't believe you guys are irrigated out there, but failure of irrigation water supply if caused by an insured peril that occurs during the insurance period. Wildlife, unless control measures have not been taken. So again, that good farming practice thing, right? And then in accordance with other sections, a decline in market price. So a decline in market price. And that wouldn't be just your market. That would be the overall market for that commodity in that area, right? So I don't know if you guys probably don't grow a whole lot of stuff that everybody else is growing. So you probably are the market for your commodity, I would assume. But I think you understand what I'm saying there when we're talking about decline in market price.
Real quick, a question. What kind of record keeping do you need to show good business, good farming practice? Is it just having a nutrient? Yeah. What kind of documentation?
So it's not good. I mean, the adjuster the companies make those determinations, they kind of just know based on crop performance and things like that, on whether or not you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. Some of it is input cost. That's where you don't report expenses, but if they see a huge decline in your expenses, right, they're going, well, why? Why did you stop spending money on this? It's like, well, you stop taking care of your crop or whatever it may be, right? But I think there's a good farming practice handbook out there and how those determinations are made. I don't believe there's a whole lot of paperwork that goes along into it unless it comes into question, if that makes sense. And, so let's talk about this. pest or fungus and things like that, they may want to see that you actually applied, right? They may want to see receipts that you applied whatever control measure it would have been. Of course, if you're organic, it's a little bit different, right? Because we all know that you can't just put any old thing on there, right? You're limited on what you can do, but that's a whole nother situation. But I believe, it depends on the loss, on what it is, and they may ask for receipts for inputs and things like that. I don't really know, because I don't make those determinations. Your regional office and or the companies do that.
Well, thank you, everyone. I think we learned a lot. Is there any other questions from anybody, our panelists, or anything else that the speakers would like to chime in on before we say hui ho? And yeah, thank you for all of our mainland speakers who are up burning the midnight oil. Oh, okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, so I guess we'll just say hui ho, and I'll be following up with everyone else over email. Thank you for continuing to book your sessions with Rebecca. And yeah, I hope you guys are, able to feel like you are able to take some action to improve your business. We're the Women Farmers Network here in Hawaii, just to let our speakers know who this cohort is. So it's women owned and operated businesses. And, we're just, yeah, grateful that we're able to work and learn from you guys as well. So thank you for all your questions and your comments. And this will be recorded. We'll have it up on the learning platform once we get that really going. So thank you for being patient with us. And yeah, thank you to everyone. I had this great comments coming in. So
India, if I might extend a invitation to your cohort. I know a lot of you had mentioned that you don't know what your policy covers. You don't know if you have adequate coverage. Myself and one other advisor in my office specifically are focusing on farms in Hawaii in general. So if any of you would like a review, a no obligation review of what you have to kind of break down the coverage you do or you don't have, we can give you recommendations. You can take that back to your agent, have a conversation to make sure it makes sense for you to do or not do certain things. We'd be happy to do that for you. I personally want to thank Rachel, because it's great to have an attorney talk about all the stuff that she said, because most insurance agents, when we say it, the perception is we're just trying to sell more insurance, but we're not. It's just about identifying risk. Risk management is key to everything. Whether you work with Lane's program, you take Rachel's advice, in the absence of insurance, risk management is your savior. So don't stop applying those risk management techniques within your own operation, because they are critical to your survival. If you don't have insurance now, if you can't afford insurance, whatever it may be, your reasons for not having it, risk management is key. And I'll put my contact info in the chat. India, you can share that with your group. I'll put our Instagram tag on there if you guys want to follow us. We try to break down insurance terms in like very simple layman's terms. Happy to follow us that way too. But I do want to offer complimentary, no questions, no commitments, no obligation. Faye and I would be very happy to help you understand whatever it is that you don't currently understand about your current programs.
awesome. Thank you, Tracy. I put your email in there, and I'm about to add your phone number. And I don't know if Rachel had to leave early, but she had mentioned that she's also able to do some calls. She's if you visit her site, Farm Commons, she's just education. So we've actually contracted with her to offer this education, similar how we did with Rebecca. So you guys can take advantage for questions that you might have. I would encourage you though to look at their website first, farmcommons.com, so that you can see what Rachel does. And Rachel, oh, thank you. I see that you just put in your calendar. So this is just like how we work with Rebecca. This is in, a session, and it's when else do you get to talk to a lawyer that understands and is passionate about farm businesses? So this is pretty unique opportunity, and we do have a budget for it. So please take advantage of that. And I guess we ho for real now. No more hanaho. We're just done.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you for hanging on. I don't know what time it is now.
Right. Good night.
Yeah, okay. Bye, everyone.